Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network. My name is Eddie Phillips. It's the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge session that we do on Thursdays of every week. I was not initially going to do this session tonight, and then I realized from a message that I got that um, people actually like to see me. So I was encouraged by that. But no, I decided that I would come on tonight, regardless of if it's that one person or even if they can't watch it and they watch the replay, that we would definitely do the program tonight. If you are new to this program, this is a Black History based session that we do every Thursday, covering Black history and talking about history that has not often been properly shared with us. Um, and we try to delve into an interactive conversation where we can speak and talk about these things together, using social media to reach people remotely. Um, I hope you all had a really great Christmas, and got a time to spend with family as we approach the end of this current year. Um, Christmas is a very important time, and it is definitely probably one of the premier family-based holidays where we can get together with our loved ones and spend time um, showing each other compassion and love and celebrate for the Christians is the birth of our Savior. So I think it is a absolutely great holiday and something that um, you know definitely goes along with what we try to talk about here on this network, and that is how we um, love and interact with our family. So I am very happy with everyone that that interacted with me on this past Christmas. Um, Tonight, I'm going to hit a couple of things, and I guess I don't expect a large audience back tonight. I just really want to make sure that we keep our viewers informed, and we continue to do what we have been guided to do on this network. Um, I think that is always my biggest push, always something that I strive to make sure that we do on every one of our shows, programs, and things that we put out, um, because I do believe that it is important. But tonight, I want to talk a little bit about some things. I First thing I guess I should do is ask a question, and it's a very basic question, and it is simply this: how much do we know as Americans, African Americans? How much do you know about the history as it relates to Spanish America, as they called it, and um, South America? Do you, as an African American, believe that you have any um, connection, interaction, um, uh, uh, um, familial, familial connections with um, people from South America? And that goes even as far as Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil. Um, what, if any, do you believe connections that you have with people who are of the Americas but are from South America? The ones who we see daily in the media um, being called a migrant problem. Do you believe that you have any connection with them? Do you believe that you share any connection. Sean Anthony, I'm glad to see you in here. If you're in here tonight, and you're in one of the people who are viewing, please drop a line. Let us know that you're watching. It encourages us, and this literally lets me know who's in here tonight to talk about this. But I want to know: do you feel, as an African American, that there is a connection with Latino, Chicano, South American people? I think it's a fair question, and a very simple question. You could either say yes or no. You can uh, say whatever. I just want to have a conversation and a thought for those of you who watch this later. Drop it in the chat. Let us know. I like to know. The reason that I'm asking this, the reason why I'm asking this, is because we associate the African diaspora. And if you don't know, because I know that that's a term that some people don't use um, generally, but I know it's been in our lexicon a little bit more over the last few years, with people like Omar Jackson and folks using it. Um, but I want to know: um, do you see the connection between the African diaspora, right, and the Latin or South American diaspora? And to define diaspora is what I was actually trying to get to. I'm sorry, somebody sent me a message here. Um, to define diaspora, you would define it as scattering or the movement of people. So we know that life, as it originated out of Africa, it moved, right? It's scattered. Sometimes the diaspora is forced. It is forced upon you by climate, by events, by people. And so when we ask that question, um, I'm trying to understand: do you get the idea that you are connected in any way? John Anthony and Teddy, I see you're in here. You can answer it too. Okay. I'm not getting much feedback tonight. That's fine. That's fine. I'm going to tell you that it is, I didn't realize my computer came on, that it is fact, a fact that the Latin, or the South American, the Americas, are populated by people who are very, very, very connected, uh, and and their movement and their scattering. And unfortunately, as we have seen different things kick off in this world, we have forgotten so much of the connections that we have: the Cuban, the Caribbean connections, the South American connections. We forget, and many of us were never even taught um, to what degree we are connected, right? We forget the connection between organizers and people who stood up together throughout history and American history, and people of color who united. And when we get to the idea of a country that says America first, America first. Remember, that was the last president's big thing: America first, America first. And the approach was to build a wall to stop the migration or the movement of people to coming into this country. And it is a deafening call because, again, we forget the connections that we have. We forget the people who are there are very much related to us. I said last week when I opened up this discussion and I said we were going to start going and talking about this, is that the Black, Latino, Chicano connection and indigenous connection goes beyond even the founding of this country. It happened well before. I told you last week that they are ethnologically, there is very little difference in these two cultures and the people who we see being shipped off to cities and mistreated. They have indigenous blood. By the nature of the slave trade, they have African blood and European blood. The only cultures who share that definitively with them are African Americans. We also have European, Black, and indigenous blood in our familial lines. And those blood ties were developed from the same situations. Slavery. And yet, that history isn't taught. That history isn't taught. And many of us ignore it when it is taught, because it's not something that we want to discuss. Eric, good to see you. A little bit. We call it immigration. But let's remember something here too. It's something else that upsets me. We forget our own history so much. And a lot of it is Black history. Excuse me. A lot of it is Black history. But it's also world and American history. It's also world and American history that we have neglected. Good to see you, Lonnie. Thank you. Blessings to you too. If you don't understand that there is a crab in a barrel mentality that has permeated American consciousness since the very founding of this nation, since the very founding, where it was Africans. First, it was indigenous when Columbus came, right? And they put in a system, the Spanish system of slavery in place. Then when the indigenous started to die, and they realized that the darker skinned, African blooded indigenous could survive longer, they advocated for the Black man, the Negro, to be enslaved. The Portuguese and the Spanish went out of their way because they understood the power that lied within that mix and within those African people. And it wasn't done out of some kind of all happenstance. They trafficked human beings from Africa over into the Americas. They trafficked them more so, 90%, 80 to 90, depending on what historian you look at, will tell you, but they all say the same thing. Of the slave trade was from Africa to South America, to Caribbeans, to the islands, to support the sugarcane and the factories and the plantations that they had in South America. So they teach us the triangle slave trade, right? They talk to us about how things were manufactured and used in goods from Africa, slaves to the Americas, and then the wealth sent back to Europe. But we have forgotten that those were people who were connected in South America and North America. We forget that we have shared ancestry, shared condition. Good evening, Pastor Razor. Good to see you. And this is unfortunate because as we war against each other, I've heard people now say, you know what? They just coming here to take our jobs. They do more for the migrants than they do for us. And we forget that there are swaths of land, huge blocks of land in America that pretty much are just land. People holding whole acres of farms and everything. And people come over and saying that they want to work. They want to work. How many of you know, and if you don't know, just put it in the chat. How many of you know that the Underground Railroad didn't just go one way? How many of you were taught that? Because I'm going to tell you from talking to people over the years, they didn't know that. They didn't know that blacks, free people who escaped slaves, went south to get to Mexico, to get to a place where people had outlawed slavery, where they felt like they could actually be treated as human beings. But who's teaching you this? Who's teaching you this? Because so many of us turn and say, well, they not us. And you forget how the slave owners did not even want the slaves to know about the Haitian Revolution because they thought it would inspire them to revolt themselves. You forget how the United States went into a war. They went into the Mexican War, right? Because when Mexico had its War of Independence, and they decided, Jose Maria Morelos, leader of the Mexican War of Independence, wrote to President James Madison. This is in 1815. And he told Madison that they shared the revolutionary mentality of the Americas. And they wanted to throw off the reins of the Spanish government and colonialism. But what people don't remember is that Morelos had been poor. He had been enslaved. And he could not understand taking over a nation and still advocating for slavery. So he called for the abolition of slavery, not only in Mexico, but in North America also. He did not want indigenous, black, or brown enslaved. And he wrote to the President of the United States to tell him this and offered for him to forge a great partnership for both South and North America that could make a difference in the world. But when I talk about Jose Maria Morelos, most people don't know who that is. They don't know who it is because it's not important. They don't know that there were escaped slaves who made their way down to Mexico to fight in the Mexican War for Independence and took great pride in fighting for freedom. We are taught about European people and taught about how the kings and queens of France, England, Spain, how wonderful these people were. And in the process of all of that, things are left out on purpose. On purpose. Because, see, if we don't show them their connections, if we don't show them how people wanted to come together for racial equality, then they will never know. When the Mexican War started for independence, the Mexican War for Independence started in the early 1800s, around 1810. Some of the first people to go fight were slaves, people who had been enslaved. They fought because they thought that freedom, they wanted to break away. And when some found out, folks made their way. They made their way down to participate in these revolutions that were happening in South America. And the anger that it created. People forget that manifest destiny, right? The idea that we own everything over here from coast to coast, and that it is our God-given right to take the land that we see from the indigenous, from other nations. They have no claim to what we have. It is our manifest destiny to be this great country. But they forget that manifest destiny was only brought into being because of the fear and the realities that had happened. The fact that the Spanish and Latin people in places like Florida, Texas, allowed Black escaped slaves to live amongst them free was more than any slave owner over here in the Americas wanted to bear. It is the reason why Andrew Jackson blew up Negro Fort and started the Seminole Wars in Florida. It is the reason why the Seminole Wars happened, because of the idea that indigenous and Latin people were protecting Blacks. That's historical, ladies and gentlemen. That's a fact. And because we don't understand these facts, we get into these issues. I did not know that. Not that I what I was taught. I guess you said not that you were taught. Okay. Lonnie, yes, sir. We're taught that what they want. We taught what they want us to know. I have a problem with immigration, but it's more on the administrative political, which is different from the traditional reasons, i.e., taking our jobs or a place. Here's the problem, though, Eric. We need to understand that the political and administrative things that have been done since the founding of this country. as it relates to people south of the border. It has always been this way. There was a fear. I'm going to give you an example. They praise John Adams and John Quincy Adams. If you were to go look up John Adams or John Quincy Adams right now, you would see that the one of the major things that they would say about these founding fathers and great politicians is that they never owned slaves and they never advocated for the idea of slavery, right? These were good men who didn't want anything to do with this horrible thing called slavery. But that's a lie. That's a lie. They didn't necessarily own slaves, but that didn't mean that they cared about people. John Adams was one of the people who wanted to make sure that no one knew about the Haiti Mexican revolutions. He was one of the people who felt that if slaves were to know about that, there would be an uprising in the country. This great abolitionist-minded man created legal frameworks, legal things in America as president, right? And argued that Black people and Latin people, right, they were not intelligent and that they could not rule themselves. They could not rule themselves. In regards to the Haitians, he assumed that because they were Black or Negro, they would not gain anything from throwing off the shackles of slavery, because they would immediately fall under the power of the more stronger people. In other words, they were too stupid to understand what democracy was. And his mentality was that democracy was based on white people guiding the rest of the world. His son, who was also a president of the United States, John Quincy Adams, when Andrew Jackson blew up Negro Fort in Florida, his chief political rival was John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams, right, who at the time was Secretary of State. He said that he understood the launching of the First Seminole War. He understood it because they had allowed slaves. These are abolitionist-minded people, supposedly. They had made promises to slaves and that they had allowed slaves to live free and undermined the money and the power of the United States. And that because they did not confine themselves to just their slaves and living free, this was a problem because it allowed people to be fugitives and to grow a secret nation. Now, him and Andrew Jackson conflicted, and many times, even until their own presidential race. However, they agreed on one thing: we cannot allow these brown and Black people or indigenous people to come together and create a new power in these Americas. And we must do everything we can to stop that. Even when the War of 1812 happened, they got mad and said that British commanders were strengthening these slave, indigenous, and Latin connections. They were afraid of it. So when we say political and administrative, we have to understand that these politics have been in place for a long time. We say we're throwing money at keeping something away. And yet we're not taught that. Oh, I know my issues are not enough. Immigration lawyers, people waiting years for a court appearance, is desperately needs reforming, and these measures are unacceptable. They have a way, Eric, to do this in a way. Listen, America has taken immigrants and people in for decades, for centuries, but it's a choosed system. They choose who they want to come over here. And I find it hypocritical because even during World War II with the Nazis, America would not, they had a quota on how many Jewish people could come here, even though they knew they were wiping out those European Jews. It is one of the reasons why I truly believe that America still finances Israel, because of its issues and what it did to people. That's Razor. I have always found it hypocritical for a country of immigrants to not interest anyone, since the country is the indigenous homeland of Native Americans than any non-Native American. There you go. I completely agree, Pastor Razor, because here's the thing. When it worked the opposite way, I was telling my sons recently, when you go read about the Pilgrims, you know, we just had Thanksgiving, and you read about the Pilgrims and how the Pilgrims came over here, and they came up with the what is it, the Mayflower Compact, and all of these things that they talk about in history, right? And yet, when they came over here, they would have died. They would have died. We talk about how they came up with this idea of self-government, but here's the thing. When they came over here, in their own writings, they stole from the graves of the indigenous people. They got off the ships, and within the first days of being in the Americas, they went in and stole, raided the graves of indigenous tribes, stole tools, things that were left there to honor the dead. And yet those people, those indigenous people, still help them. There are proud Americans who trace themselves all the way to the Mayflower and hold their heads up proud. My family came over on the Mayflower. It's crazy how hypocritical, how cognitive dissonance rules in America. It's crazy. Because in the end of the day, right, we live these lies. We live these lies. I often tell people, right, folks sit around all the time talking about the Alamo. Remember the Alamo. Remember the Alamo. Right? But we forget what led to the Alamo. We forget what America did. And every time you pull up something, every time you go read history written by folks with a slant, you hear them. Every time we talk about these issues, somebody says, "Oh, it's complex." It's a lot of parts to this. No, there really isn't. The reason for the Alamo, the reason why Texans wanted those people went down there, right? And they wanted to fight against the Spanish rule. The reason why they did that is because they wanted to push slavery. The Mexican government allowed so many people to come down there So many settlers, they gave them the ability to have land. And they came down there and they overwhelmed. The same thing we're hearing in our news today. The Mexicans were shocked, blown away of how many white immigrants rolled in and took land and then pushed slavery, even though they had outlawed slavery. And then they called it a Texas Revolution. And they said they decry, remember the Alamo. Right? We got to be independent from Mexico. This is Texan. When in fact, they did what they're claiming that these immigrants are doing right now. You went in illegally outside of the agreements and you took land. And when you were told to leave or to relinquish your slaves, you said, no, the hell with that. We're going to go to war. That's remember the Alamo. When we teach these things properly, and I'm going to spend a couple of weeks, maybe the next 2 weeks, going more in depth, talking about these things and trying to get us to understand, because I'm tired of hearing it. I'm tired of people who don't know telling us what they think we should know. People came together. They came together. Next week, I think I'm going to talk about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. A treaty that many people have no idea and what it meant. Because what it really did was it allowed, again, for us to respond in a negative way. We're going to talk about the lynchings and the killings and the murders and the things that were happening and how people took over parts of California, Texas, what we see as Arizona, how they went in and they took these white vigilantes engaged in murderous assaults against both blacks and Mexican Americans who were supposed to be protected. Stole land. We need to know our history. I know I say that so much on Erudition. We spend so much time talking about what is taught to us, or I like to say what is known to us, that we forget that there is a vast amount that was not taught to us, and that there were purposes for not teaching us this. There were reasons to keep poor whites, poor blacks, indigenous, and Latinos separate from each other, to make them despise each other. We forget that slavery as a business, because that's what it was, had many heads. We forget that there were people in the North and in the South who made money from the continual push of these types of mentalities. The freeing of the Negro, as they called it then, facilitated a problem that still hasn't been solved in their minds. They create this false unity too. That's why we still have people in the South who barely have running water talking about the lost cause. While you still have people flying Confederate flags saying this is my heritage. Because slavery and bigotry created a pseudo unity that really doesn't exist, and told them, oh, we're all the same, and neglected to tell them, but you're different classes, and they don't see you as the same when it comes down to labor. If he could not enslave the indigenous, the black, or the Latino, then who was he going to enslave? His own. And history, ancient history, has shown us that was always the case. But they live with this impractical lie that keeps them going at night, that keeps racism and hatred festering, that tells us American first, make my country great again. And they understand that if none of us were here, they'd have to do it on their own. We have stepped back from the 50s and the 60s when great leaders of color, stood up together and said, no, let us come together to make something better. And then we allowed machinations and things to come into place that pulled it away from us. Most of us don't know and haven't read much history outside of what we get from kindergarten to 12th grade. And many of us were taught, and it was on purpose, history is boring. History is boring. But in all of that, when you say history is boring and I don't want to pay attention to it, you're losing knowledge. You become disinterested in the very thing that you should be most interested in. Every person should want to know where they come from, who their mother, who their father was. What did I inherit? By genes, by wealth, by culture. What did I inherit? What did I get? Who am I? And when we play cultural politics, we forget the issues that happened in the centuries before that established and put us where we are right now. That Anglo-Saxon racism wasn't just towards the blacks, the freed slaves, the former enslaved. It was against the blacks, the Mexicans, the Chinese, the indigenous, and it was all interconnected. They wrote laws in places like California that restricted Chinese people from even being here. That put people in subservient roles that the only difference was you weren't called a slave, but you was treated like one. Where all your basic rights were stripped of you. And so people migrated south. We don't talk about Cuba. We don't talk about the Dominican Republic. We don't talk about Puerto Rico. We don't talk about any of those nations, cultures, and recognize that they are related to us. When Marcus Garvey went out and screamed for a migration out of this wicked land, they initially agreed with him until they realized what we just talked about. If not for them, who's going to do the job? Who's going to do the work? And that is still the nation, the issue right now. I'm going to leave this last 15 minutes for you all. Chime in, disagree. That is your right. We all have that right. But I really want us to start focusing on this, because I think I'm not saying that you all who are on tonight don't understand it, but I'm going to tell you there are sections of the African American community who sees this migration thing as one of the greatest problems in their life. And they don't understand the manipulation. They don't understand the lie. They don't understand the cyclical lie of history. They're lost because they don't really want to know. I was reading an author a couple of weeks ago, and in his beginning of his book, he talked about how he was born in the middle 60s. And by the time he got in fourth grade, right, his mother, who was Mexican, married a white man. And the white man wanted to assimilate. He wanted to assimilate this young man. And that when they would sit at the dinner table, his white stepfather would tell him that if he wanted to eat with them, if he wanted to associate with his mother and the baby that they had, that he would have to stop eating. And I won't use the expletive, but he called him out of his name, a Spanish insult. Stop eating like this. And then he would later go, because he understood, he would also tell him, stop eating like this and stop drinking like a nigga. That's what he told him, 4-year-old boy. Oh, sorry, a 10-year-old boy. And whenever he would argue with him, or as he got older and have fights with him, he would tell him, I'm not going to wash your mouth out with soap. I'm going to wash it out with hot sauce. And he would go about doing that. The author was trying to make the point that we are connected. And I agree with this author. I really do, because I think we've lost our identity and understanding that they saw us as the same thing. And I think that it's one of the greatest problems with us right now, because, see, as the country is changing, if you were to go get a job right now, many of you who have gone out and applied for employment within the last, I say, 10 years, you will notice that they have a different demographic now, right? Let's see if I can pull up an example of that. They have a different demographic right now. When they ask the race question on applications, right? They ask you, and I'm sure you've all seen it, because it's not just for applications either. I'm sure you've all seen it. They ask, are you Black or African American? Are you Native American, American Indian, Alaskan Native? They ask if you're Asian. They ask if all of it. They tell you also you don't have to fill this out, right? But then they later come back and say, well, we just need to know, there are certain things you can do and you can get if you're in one of these diverse groups. Now they've added on there, are you Black? Are you Latin? And if you are Latin, are you Black Latin or are you white Latin? What the heck is Black or white Latin? But that's what's being asked. They could simply say, hey, are you multicultural? No, they want to identify you as something. And I had a friend who told me one time, got into an argument with me and said, Eddie, I'm not Mexican, I'm Spanish. My people were conquistadors. And I said, wow, are you really proud of what the conquistadors did? But this is the game. This is the separation game that so many of us aren't really paying attention to. And that separation game is just another form of crabs in the barrel. Just another way for things to happen that way. But, but that's what it is. I set reminders for my kids to go take things out. But I think it's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate. I thought it was another comment that came in. All right, you all, we're coming down to the last 4 or 5. We're within the last 10 minutes of the episode. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, things you want to say, hey, drop that up in the chat. I'll be willing to answer it, talk about it, and we can go over that tonight before I get ready to go off, or we can put a button on it for next week. But I know this hasn't been as much of an interactive session as I would like it to be, but I really wanted to get some points out tonight. If you have questions, concerns, if you want something that can expand your knowledge on the connection between African Americans and Latin people, Spanish Americans, please let me know, and I can offer you a plethora of a huge amount of books, places to go to increase your knowledge. Because one thing that we like to do here is we want to make sure that you're also learning on your own, not just me talking to you over these over the internet. So if you would like some reading material, some place to go to grow your own knowledge, I will drop that in here. I probably will drop it in here anyway because that's how I am. But I want you to grow your knowledge. All right. Is there any questions, any history questions, anything that's out here right now? Or for the 4 or 5 people that I have on, you saw some of you on early. I don't know if you're still here, but any questions that you may have, I'm willing to give some time to as we get ready to check on out of here tonight. And I'm sorry, I did not put my banner on. Sorry, Teddy. All right, I put my banner on. You don't have to kill me. Any thoughts, concerns, questions, things you like to see on the Erudition Network, subjects you like us to go over, questions that you have, resources that you're looking for to grow your knowledge on history or any of the material. I'm here to answer that question for you right now in these last 5 minutes before I check out of here and go, I guess, eat. Oh my God. Israel is a terrorist state is not a request for information, Eric. It is a statement that you're making. A statement that you're making. You know, that whole thing, though, where we are right now with Israel, with different countries around the world, people better recognize the change in tones that we're seeing throughout the world, not just from America, and how larger companies influence these tones. And I don't see things quickly getting better. I see things kind of falling off. and getting worse. And it's because some of the lessons that we should have learned, we've hidden them, but we haven't taught them. And we're falling back down a proverbial hole. So all right, I guess you guys don't have anything. I appreciate all of you all. Thank you for joining us tonight. I was not going to do this session. I think Tina was on Monday. The boys were not on yesterday. And I was like, it's holidays. We're coming out of Christmas. Maybe I won't. But some of these things have sat on me for quite some time, and they're really bothering me about how we misinterpret and misunderstand the connections that we have in history. And I do believe that a social or public historian is an essential part of clearing this up. And let me clarify that. One that wants to share factual knowledge with you. One who's going to send you to places and things where you can go to grow your knowledge and to validate facts. So much out here does not validate anything factual. And yes, those people who do that, they have thousands of folks who solicit their channels and talk about nothing. Talk about how, stones and I can walk through 3 doors and all of these different 3 doors into different dimensions and all of this weirdness based on pseudoscience, passed down illogical statements, but it's what's out here. Eric, I don't mind doing a show on apartheid. Matter of fact, it's a great subject. And as I've told you before, I think we're kind of moving. There are people who want us to move to an apartheid type system, and they're doing everything in their power to do that. So I don't have a problem with doing that. That would be a great topic to talk about. It is an emotional topic though, but I think it's something that we should talk about. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. If I don't get to it before within January, it might be a great subject for us to talk about and kind of go into during Black History Month. Because Black history is world history and knowledgeable histories. So speaking of that, I want you all to make sure I'm going to drop it into the Erudition Network page again. Pastor Razor has a book coming out. It will be out if I am, and please forgive me if I'm mistaken. But the book will be out, I believe, on the 1st. That it follows history. I'm going to actually pull up, because I want you all to definitely go out and get this book and grow from it. But I believe, and Pastor Razor, if you catch the end of this, please feel free to put a link or something on our page. But I think I've been dropping a couple of things on Erudition Network. But it's Black History According to God's Word. Great book coming out and much needed to show you the connections that we actually have and how things actually transpired in world history that are very closely represented in the Bible. So a work that I think is needed and people need to read so that they can have a better understanding when they read that Bible of who their ancestors and who those people were. Because too often, I know as a young kid, I never thought about the African and the Black people who were in the Bible, right? Because we all saw Jesus with blue eyes and long brown, hair and smiling, and even in the movies. So to actually have a book where you can go and you can read and trace and see how the migration of people, how that happened from the Bible is very important. And I want you all to support that. And hopefully we'll be able to get him on here to talk about that at some point. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna get out of here. I've done the hour. Thank you for your time. Hey, please feel free to support Help the Erudition Network. That is our Cash App down there at the bottom. You could easily send whatever you have to help us out as we grow this great network. It's $ the Erudition Network. Very simple. You will see our Erudition symbol and you will know you're in the right place and you can donate. All right, let me get out of here. Have a blessed rest of um, your weekend as we go into this new year, and hopefully, God willing, we will see you again next Thursday or next week. Have a great one. Be blessed. Thank you all again for your time and your effort being here with us tonight. Thank you.